and when you sign out, we'll give you a certificate. And when the board approves those credits, that'll be on their webpage. So you'll be able to use that certificate to show you were here if you stay to the end and you signed out. Okay. And the web folks, we have slides, a copy of the slides, and the agenda, and I think some screens and stuff that we didn't get a chance to send you before the presentation today, but we will send it to you in the next couple of days. Today our presenters are Barry Frasco. I didn't introduce myself. My name is Tessie Fields. I'm back. You thought you got rid of me, but I'm back part-time, and thrilled to be here doing this with you guys. Barry Frasco is going to be our first presenter. He's the Assistant Director of the Hazardous Site Science element. He's going to be talking about remedial investigations and the new legislation that has happened recently and what the impacts of those are. Elaine Dewan is going to speak today, and she is from the Bureau Chief of the Bureau of Information Systems. So she'll be talking about two things, some information regarding the RI stuff that Barry's going to be talking about, and the new electronic SID. And Karen Gentis, who is the supervisor of the Remediation Funding Source Unit, will also be talking about financial obligations related to the RI, and we'll be talking about how you go about transitioning remediation funding sources to financial assurance. And she's nodding. I actually said that right. So that's good. Okay, what we're going to do is 2 hours long. We have a lot of information, so we're not going to have any breaks today. If you need to take a break, please do so. And I think everybody knows where all the facilities are. So we're going to be taking questions at the end. It's on the agenda. You've got the slides and you've got the agenda. And on the agenda it says when we'll be taking questions. And we are going to very carefully, we're going to make sure you have a microphone. So when you ask a question, everyone will be able to hear it. So we're going to adhere to that carefully. Okay, what else? Okay, we're going to ask Dan Toder to come up, and we should probably be on the welcome slide now, Joe, and then go to Dan's slides. So we're going to do the best we can with what we've got. Thank you, Dan.
Welcome back, Tess. Didn't take you long. Barry, I'll help you fix your tire if you need it.
Whoever wants to see pictures of my granddaughter.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Good afternoon to everybody on the webinar. There is a lot to cover today, so I'm going to step out of the way real fast just to remind you of a few things. On behalf of the LSRPA, we have, next slide. Okay, just a reminder, the first LSRPs that were licensed, I think that was July of 2012. If you count it out, there's only 14 months for you guys to get all your credits. And I say 14 months because you have to submit your renewal application 90 days before your license expires. So time's running out, and if you don't have more than, let's say, 12, 15 credits by now, you're in a little trouble. So you need to accumulate those credits. If you're in the room today, you get 2. Okay, categories, you know, you have certain minimums to meet. Next slide, please. And usually you get a 1-for-1 exchange, 1 hour of instruction for 1 CEC of credit. But there are conditions on some other ways of getting credits. Just be sure you know what those conditions are. They're in the board's draft rules. And make sure that if you do go to a conference or a seminar, convention, that the board is going to give you credit for that before you go, because I know some folks that have gone to some of these and then they find out that they won't the credits won't be accepted, or the number of credits that you ask for is not going to be approved. So just make sure that, you're going to get credit for what you think you're going to get credit for. Next one. Okay, a couple of dates here. The LSRPA is putting on an event. We did this in the summertime. We're doing it again because it was pretty successful. We are trying to encourage people to become LSRPs. So we are having a networking event in Metuchen. I think it's at a Pizza Uno on Route 1 for people who are thinking about being an LSRP in the business now, or they may be even students. We had some students show up last time. So that was very good. So put that on your calendar. We are conducting another LSRP exam review class to prepare people who are going to take the test to take the test. And it's going to be run like we ran it before. And I think it's a little helpful in identifying your weaknesses and your strengths as far as the process of site remediation goes. And then on the same day, it just so happens, turns out the DEP in this training room will have training on the newest guidance document that came out, the technical impracticability. And I can't believe I said that right the first time. And then on March 19th, we have the LSRP exam. So thanks for listening. I'm going to get out of here so that things can proceed. Thank you.
Testing, testing. Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I made it. Nothing as invigorating as changing a tire on 95. Whew, lots of fun. What I'm going to do this afternoon is to talk about the legislation dealing with the statutory deadline for the completion of the RI. If any of you attended either of the Rutgers training sessions during the case study, you're going to get the same presentation on the front end of this presentation, and then the back end will be a little different and a little newer. So that said, away we go. This all goes back to SRRA in section 27A3. This language is why we're here. This nice little paragraph has probably been dissected more ways than you can believe. I think I'm going to run over here. Get out of the feedback, hopefully. This has been parsed out line by line, word by word, to the point of where the commas are placed to figure out what all this means. So what I'd like to do is to talk a little bit about this. First off, who does this apply to? Well, it applies to sites or sites with discharges or contaminated areas of concern where the contamination was or should have been identified due to an obligation to do a PASI on or before May 7th of 1999. So that's the key here. These are older cases that either the known discharge or should have known the discharge going back that far. And that's either through ISRA or through the UST rules, through an administrative court or a court order, through a remediation agreement, or a Spill Act directive. So that is your universe of sites. What must a responsible party do relative to these affected sites? The answer is the remedial investigation has to be completed within 5 years after the date of enactment of SRRA. So if you do the math, the compliance date is May 7th of 2014. And a little later on, I will talk about the new provision relative to the chance to extend that out another couple of years. Okay, are there any sites that are exempt from this provision? Yes, there are. And there are a few of them here, and I'm not going to go through great detail, but if it's a federal lead site, if it's a federal facility, if it's a Spill Act exempt entity, if it's a site that was in compliance and there is a litigation settlement that occurred prior to 2009 or was pending on that date, and any case that's made its way through where either a no further action or an RAO, well, it would be a no further action. And so it's in O&M type phase. So these are the facilities that are exempt from the statutory deadline. Okay, is there a penalty for not complying? Penalty in quotes. The answer is yes. It is the placement of that site under direct department oversight. And there's a laundry list of what that means, not the least of which is that you need to establish a trust fund. DEP becomes much more involved in the sense that we will be reviewing and approving documents. The department will select the remedial action. There will be increased public involvement and that ever popular enforcement fines and penalties. So as a lot of people have said, this is not necessarily a place where a responsible party would like to be. Okay, what we have done is to try to present some information to the regulated community relative to our interpretation of that section in SRRA. And we developed a policy statement. That's the title of the statement. We put that out in May of 2014. And what does it cover? This covers our definition and an explanation of what we mean by entire contaminated site, what we mean by completing the remedial investigation, what we mean by the nature and extent of the contamination, and a statement relative to attaining the remediation standards prior to the issuance of an RAO. Okay, first off, what do we mean by entire contaminated site? Well, what we're saying here is entire contaminated site means all discharges and contaminated AOCs, which include all environmental media. So it's soil, it's groundwater, it's surface water, it's sediment, it's vapor intrusion. It's the whole gamut of environmental media. Also, it's any location where that contamination exists, whether it's on-site or if that contamination has migrated or is migrating off-site at any level above a remediation standard or screening level. So that's the key point here. When we talk about contaminated site, it's not the physical extent of the property. It could be the physical extent of the property plus whatever's moved off-site. So if you have a contaminated groundwater plume that is moved 300 yards down gradient off of your property, that contaminated groundwater plume is part of the contaminated site. And if you have potential VI issues emanating from that contaminated plume, because we talk about air, those VI issues are part of the entire contaminated site. So that's what we're talking about. What do we mean by completing the remedial investigation? Okay, what we mean by that is, number one, you need to know the nature and extent of the discharge, both on and off site. Like I say, the entire contaminated site, so the whole kit and caboodle. You need to identify, are there impacted receptors or is there a potential for a receptor to be impacted by that discharge? And number three, if you need to do a remedial action, that you've collected enough information to support the evaluation of any possible remedial alternative that you're going to select. So those are the three key components for completing the RI. Okay. How is the department going to evaluate this? It's evaluated based on the submission of certain things to the department and while being in compliance with the tech regs. Number one, you need to submit a remedial investigation report pursuant to subchapter 4 of the tech regs. Number two, you need to submit an updated receptor evaluation, which is part of the RI report. And number three, and again, this is all part of the RI report, that you've determined whether or not you have a remedial action that's required for the site, and you have enough information to make that judgment. So that's what we're looking for in terms of what needs to be submitted relative to saying you've completed the remedial investigation. Nature and extent of contamination. It's the delineation of the contamination to the applicable remediation standards or screening levels or criteria at the time the RI report is submitted. Okay, now, Does that mean that when you're doing this, that you are going out and you are collecting samples to determine an endpoint with actual physical analytical data to define your extent of contamination? The answer is no. That's not required. What is required? What is required is using the applicable regulations, using any applicable guidance, and using your professional judgment that using this process, that you feel comfortable that you have determined the nature and extent of the contamination. So if you wanted to use some modeling or whatever, but if you're comfortable that you feel that you've defined your area and extent of the contamination, you're done. The only caveat is, by the end of the process, you will have to be able to demonstrate using clean zone sampling whether or not you're going to do excavation and treatment and you're doing post-treatment sampling to verify that you've met the standard, or you're using engineering or institutional controls that you've defined the boundary of your engineering control. You're going to need those clean zone samplings. And, there we go. Wait a minute. Why is that not working? There we go. This has to be done at the conclusion of your RA, and prior to the issuance of the RAL. Compliance. The department really wants everyone to be able to comply with this statutory deadline. And we have tried to help responsible parties, and this is what we've done to date. We went through our NGN systems to try to identify those sites that fit the criteria for the statutory deadline. In June, we sent letters to responsible parties saying, we believe, based on the information we have in our system, that you are a site that falls into this category. If a responsible party believes that that information was incorrect in the sense that either, number one, they did complete the RI, or two, they weren't even a case eligible to be part of the statutory deadline, that we did provide a mechanism for them to submit documentations in order for us to correct our data system. So that's what we've done thus far.
Barry,
Yes.
we're taking a 2-second break while Joe puts up the corrected slides.
Okay.
So the handout that you have, the people in the room, is not going to line up with the slides we're going to be showing you.
Yeah, I changed everything yesterday.
What?
It's my fault. Okay, here we go. There was a recent amendment to SRRA, Public Law 2013, Chapter 283, and this statute gives a responsible party an extension to complete the RI for sites that had the obligation to do so pursuant to that statutory deadline. So this applies to those sites that were in the system with a discharge or known to have, or should have known to have a discharge back in May of 1999. So you have to meet certain criteria to get that extension. What they have to do is the responsible party has to certify in an application. This application has to be submitted electronically. This electronic submission has to be done by an LSRP, and this is an LSRP who's been retained by the person responsible for conducting the remediation. What a mouthful. Basic line is, bottom line is, it's an electronic submission, has to be done by the LSRP, and it's an LSRP hired by the RP to oversee the remediation. And you have to meet 7 conditions. What are those conditions? One of them is that an LSRP has been retained to conduct the remediation at the site. That's numero uno. Dos. Any and all mandatory remediation timeframes have been met for the site at the time at the time of the certification. So when you are submitting that electronic certification, you are certifying that you have met all of the remediation timeframes. Number 3, certain reports have to have been submitted and that they are technically complete and in compliance with the department's rules. And as the LSRP and the RPU are certifying that. And what are those particular reports? Well, this is one that everyone has to do. You have to have an initial receptor evaluation. The rest of them are as applicable at your site. If you have an IEC condition, you have to make sure that your source control report has been submitted. If you have LNAPL issues at your site, you have to make sure that your, that your remedial measure, interim measure report has been submitted. If you're subject to doing a preliminary assessment, that's been done. And if you are subject to do a site investigation, that has been done. So you have to certify that those are all complete and have been submitted. Number 4, if you are a site pursuant to Section 25 of SRRA, you have to have a remediation funding source if you are a facility that's required to have an RFS. Or, if you weren't required to have an RFS previously, that you have to establish a remediation trust fund for the estimated cost of the RI. Now this gets a little tricky, and Karen will be going over this in a little more detail relative to which particular cases fall into this number 5 category. Number 6, you have to have all your oversight costs paid up. And number 7, all your annual fees, including the 1% surcharge, has been paid to the department and you're up to date. So those are those 7 conditions. If you can meet those 7 conditions, you're in good shape. The application, it's an electronic application. The only way you can submit this is through the DEP online portal. That's the only way we're going to accept it, and Elaine is going to talk about that in a little bit more detail in terms of how that's going to occur. The application will include, how many here like forms? Raise your hand. Ah, great, 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 because we have forms for you to fill out. One form is the extension request form. It's a simple form. It's easy. No problem. And number 2, an authorization form signed by the RP that allows the LSRP to submit the extension request. Sometimes it's a little convoluted, but it is what it is. Okay. These submissions have to be made by March 7th of this year. Today is February 6th. You have a month. That's right, February is a short month. Not too much time, but all these submissions must be made by March 7th. The key here is, once you've hit the send button to send it to the portal, that application will be deemed approved as long as we've received it. So this is not a situation where the department is reviewing this application and approving it. The way it's set up in the statute is, once you've submitted it, it's deemed approved by the department. But, I'm sorry, I got one more thing. Once it's deemed approved, you have a 2-year extension to complete the RI to March 7th, 2016. Okay, I'm going to save that but for later. There's another mechanism where you can get an extension, and this is a situation where as an RP, you cannot complete the RI because you are waiting for funding via the Hazardous Discharge Site Remediation Fund. Now, this one's a little different than the one I previously said because it's a combination of a deferral as well as an extension. The RP has to submit an electronic application that states that they have submitted an administratively and technically complete HDSRF application by March 7th of 2014. Oops. Got a little flip-flopped. The application has to be made through the online portal, and you have 2 forms here. It's, again, the same thing, the extension request form and the authorization form. So it's the same situation. But the difference here is, and the submission has to be by March 7th of 2014, and again, it's deemed approved upon receipt by the department. But the difference here is that the time clock doesn't start until you get word back whether or not you've received the funding. So while you're waiting for that, every 6 months, you need to submit something to the department presenting the update status. 6 months later, I haven't heard. 6 months after that, I haven't heard. So that's the deferral part. Once a determination's been made, okay, if you get approved, then you get 2 years to complete the RI after the receipt of the funding, or if it's denied, you've got 2 years to complete the RI. So you have a deferral period till you hear about the funding, and then once that determination's been made, then you've got the 2-year extension. Okay, here's the but. The department may undertake direct oversight of a remediation at one of these sites if a couple of things happen. Number one, the conditions imposed under the bill are no longer met. You don't submit an annual fee. You miss a mandatory, oh, that's the other one. You miss a mandatory remediation time frame. If these things happen, the department may undertake that direct department oversight provision. Yeah, yes. All right. Last but not least, the department does have to do a couple of things. We are required to post notice of all the extensions on our website, and we have to include the name of the site, the location of the site, and the length of the extension. So anyone who wants to know relative to these extensions, we do have to provide that information. And I do believe, oh, I take that back. If you want any information relative to this whole issue, this is the website. But this website doesn't exist as we speak right now because we added the extension there. So it doesn't exist, but once we have it all ready to go, that's going to be the link. And we are hoping, David, right, tomorrow, we're hoping to get this thing going live tomorrow. This will have anything and everything you want to know about getting the 2-year extension to completing the RI. And now I think I'm at the end. Yes, questions? Oh, are we going to? No.
Okay, Elaine is going to talk about the electronic submittal of the forms related to the RI extension.
I want to thank you, Barry, for that introduction. I could tell that you love me already. Forms, online services. Anyway, the website does exist. It's just in development. It's all we got to do is move it to production, which hopefully will be a simple feat. We have been working on it for 2 or 3 weeks now. All right, my job here is to just briefly give an overview of what the RI extension service is going to look like. How many people use the RPS, the Remedial Priority Scoring Feedback Loop service? All right, this is all going to look very familiar because we repurposed that particular service to perform this function. So the only thing that will be different is some of the instructions on the screen. Otherwise, it's basically the same service. So, Joe, can you just pull up the form just so you can see basically what we're looking at as far as the form goes? Which form? The form, the RI extension form. That was the one on the thumb drive.
Why don't you tell them a joke, Barbara?
I got so many form jokes, you know. Anyway, there are certain things that need to be done before you actually file this form. This is the form. This needs to be fully completed prior to going online. That means that if you are using the HDSRF application mode, you should have already submitted your HDSRF application to the department. So that can't be done at the same time simultaneously. That should be in place and in our hands prior to submitting that, because that's really the only way you can check the first box. If you do have to get a remediation trust fund, that all has to be in place and filed prior to going on DEP Online and filing this service, because really that's the only way to check some of these other boxes. The reason why we have two forms is the first form has some check boxes and other information. It's actually a programmed PDF. So what you fill out there, we're able to use that as data and information. So we can't have a scanned copy of that. We need the actual electronic version. Now the authorization form, the only way that really works is if there's a signature. So that is a scanned document. So we need the form itself, electronic, from your computer, and then the scanned authorization form from the RP, your client. That's why there's two. It's simple. It's just two steps that have to be done. All right. And I don't have the authorization form here because it's just basic certification language we use at the end of all of our forms. Yes, the authorization form is just a signature form. So I don't have that here. I just wanted to show you the actual form that we needed to, there it is. Voila! I'm pretty good, huh? Magic. So, and the reason why we put the site name and location on here, we found through the RPS service that we had two documents. Sometimes we couldn't always match them up. So at least if we have the top info the same, we can match them up. And when you are uploading, make sure you have the right file. We did get a flyer from a dentist's office on Halloween candy distribution. We got a few very funky things, so try to upload the correct file when you do this. All right, so now we can go to my presentation, which is the screenshots for the RI extension service. So, if you have yet to file anything online and you are the LSRP, make sure you have your license number in your user profile. Because without that, you get to the end of the service, you can't go any further. So do that up front. The second thing, make sure you have your facility you're filing this for in your profile. So when you open up, right there, there's a facilities, your facilities are first, and then all your service submission progress falls later. So just make sure you have your facility in your profile, you have your license number in your user profile, and you have all the documents you're going to be uploading readily available. Because without those, at any time you'd have to stop. It gets a little frustrating. All right. So the name of the service is May 2014 RI Timeframe Extension Service. We're hoping to get this into production sometime tomorrow or worst case on Monday. It will go into production and we have to test it first. So if you see it there and you haven't got word that it's good to go, don't use it yet, because once we put it all in, we like to test first to make sure folks don't have an issue. All right, so you click on, the first thing is your submission name. We recommend that you put your PI number in there, the name of the case, and anything else that you need to find this submission again. So if you do have many clients, just name it in such a way, if your service gets interrupted and you have to go back to it, it'll help you find it. This page is for you. It's not for us. So it's a good way to identify your submission. Next page. Because you put your facility in your facility profile, you should be able to see it here. Here's where you pick your facility. You do need to pick a facility and a case for this to work. So you can't like just click, click, click and make it all the way through. What will happen is your extension won't go anywhere. So you pick your facility. Next slide. Next slide. All right. Now you need to identify your person conducting the remediation, your responsible party. This screenshot here has a submitter on there that for our service, there's only going to be one tab here, and it's person remediating. And we do need an email address here because once you do all the filing, we are going to send both the responsible party as well as the submitter, the LSRP, a confirmation email. So if you put that information in here, you'll know that it went through and where it went through to. So it's helpful to you. All right, next screen. Now you will pick your activity. We gave some extra information about looking for the particular activity. We're looking for activities with activity numbers that begin with like LSR, LSRP cases. There are some responsible party, traditional oversight cases that are subject to the May 2014. Anything else probably is not appropriate. If you have an IEC case, there's usually two activities. One of them is a OSA IEC activity. You don't want that one. You want the LSRP case, LSR. So make sure you pick the right one. All right. And then you get to uploading your attachments. So make sure you type something in the attachment name there, because if you leave that blank, nothing will happen. You have to start over. So the directions tell you, type something in there. And we gave recommendations what to type in there, but don't leave that blank. And then you click your browser button, and it works like any other browser. You know, you look on your computer where the document is, and you upload it. So you upload the form, both the extension form and the authorization form. Once you have both of them browsed and loaded here, you hit continue, and it comes up to this is basically a cataloging piece to our software, and basically indicate that it's a form and what form it is. These are drop-down menus, so it'll be really easy for you to do because there's very few things in the drop-down menus, so it should be pretty obvious. Click continue. Next page. And here you certify and you put your PIN number in. And then you click certification, right? Certify. And you're done. What you will get is a submission summary. You can print that out for you. And then an email will be fired off to you. If you got everything right, you'll get an email saying, hey, here's your email saying the RI extension has been received. And are we putting something about deemed approved in the email? Yes. Let's say you are not an LSRP. You'll get an email saying you're not an LSRP. Let's say you're not the LSRP of record for a case. The email will say you're not an LSRP retained for this case. So try to do all of that prior to filing this particular form. And are there any more?
Yes.
Scott Tyrell, why don't you?
RI due date is not May 7, 2014.
Okay, if you picked a case where actually the RI due date is not in the system as of May 7, 2014, that's a way to show that you probably didn't pick the right case. So those are all the emails. We will be monitoring the emails that did go out, so we have an idea if the filing was not with an LSRP or the wrong place. So we'll try to get that all taken care of in a timely fashion. So we will be running some of those reports. That is the RI Extension Online Service. Should be easy, simple, straightforward. We try to make it that way. Thanks.
Nope, not yet.
No questions.
Not yet. Karen Dennis is going to talk about the financial portion of this issue.
Heavy sigh.
Might take a minute to get there.
Well, while we're waiting, I have a question for you guys.
Do you know where you have the control? Are you?
I'm going to say next slide because I'm not too good at that.
Okay.
So who's been to SeaWorld and you've seen the Shamu show? And when you go to see the Shamu show,
That's what we're going to do for you.
all right, thank you. So anyway, maybe the first 6 rows, they're painted yellow because it's the splash zone. Well, the first 3 rows are going to be, you can't imagine what a nightmare it has been to get all this stuff together. Between all of the discussions we've had, especially about RFS, what the legislature thinks they meant by you have to have your RFS in place, and I haven't had power in a day and a half, my head's going to explode. So if you're sitting in the first 3 rows, you are in. I'm just warning you. Get your Snickers. It's going to be a mess. I can't do it that way. I'll do it this way. I'll be good. All right. By the way, if I get a text from my husband that I got power, I'm out of here. I got to go take a shower. All right. Anyway. All right. So, yes, in the statute that just was recently passed that provides for this extension of an RI complete, the RI complete deadline, there is an RFS component that you have to meet. And I'll tell you a tale out of school. The legislature puts something in there and then doesn't think it through what it all means. So we had to parse out what it all means, and that's what I'm going to tell you about here. It's not as straightforward as they think. So I'm going to go over several different scenarios and the nuances of each scenario. So in some situations, you can choose any of the forms of RFS that are available, which include the trust fund, the letter of credit, line of credit, environmental insurance policy, or self-guarantee. But in some situations, you are limited to just posting a remediation trust fund as your RFS. In some situations, you're going to have to pay the 1% RFS surcharge, and in some situations, you do not have to pay the RFS surcharge. And in some cases, you can post one RFS, one remediation trust fund, where you can bundle all of the sites for which you are responsible to clean up under one trust fund. So I'm just going to, well, there's people on the webinar, because I was going to ask if anyone here deals with the major oil companies or any kind of site that might have several sites in New Jersey. But it doesn't matter because I can't see people raising their hands. Okay, good. Yes. Now I need the next slide. All right, so the criteria is, there's the basic criteria, which is if you are required by the Brownfields Act to post RFS and you've done it, you're good. You have met that criteria. The RFS part of the 7 criteria to qualify for the exemption, the RFS part has been met. Congratulations. If you were not required to establish RFS pursuant to Brownfields, then you are going to have to establish RFS prior to March 7th, 2014, and I'm going to get into detail as to what that entails in a minute. I'm also going to talk about who does not have to post or establish a remediation funding source. That's going to be, and who does and who doesn't have to pay the surcharge. Okay, next slide, because this is, I've been getting many phone calls saying, wait a minute, I know there's exemptions for posting RFS. Do they apply in this case? Not technically, but there are people who are not going to be required to post RFS and can still meet or qualify for the extension. So if you meet any of the provisions of the ARCS rules at 5.2b, and it's 1, if you meet 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, or 7, you don't have to post. The big one that I've been getting questions about are government entities. Do government entities have to post any kind of RFS in order to meet the deadline? And the answer is no. They are in one of those citations there. If you'll notice, there's one missing, and that is 3. And 3 talks about people who are remediating their site to an unrestricted or a limited restricted use remedial action. Those people do have to post RFS in order to get the exemption. The thinking is you haven't completed your RI, so you don't have enough information to know what type of remedial action you'll be implementing. The same nuances, I'll use that word again, that deal with the exemptions for people who would have had to post their RFS under the Brownfields Act are applying here. And specifically what I'm talking about is some of the other exemptions. So there's the government entities, you don't have to post. If you're remediating in an environmental opportunity zone, or if you're going to be using an innovative remedial technology as your remedial action, you don't have to post for that portion of your site that is either in that environmental opportunity zone or for which you are using that innovative remedial action. For the rest, so you might still have to post for the rest of the site. Next slide. So, we talked about that if you were required to establish RFS under the Brownfields Act, you don't have to, you're good. You've met that criteria. So what we were talking about. We were talking about people who triggered ISRA, people who had a consent order, an administrative consent order, a judicial consent order, or somebody who had a directive that ordered you, the consent orders or the directive ordered you to post RFS. You're in compliance, you've already done it, you are up to date in your surcharge payments, you have maintained whatever that instrument was, say it's a letter of credit, you've maintained it all these years, you're good. You've met that criteria, you may pass go. The surcharges. So lately, we've been, in anticipation of this, we have been sending out invoices for people. We've been finding people who haven't paid their surcharges in a number of years, and we've been sending them invoices to allow them to know how much they owe and to make sure they're paid by March 7th. And that has also generated a lot of phone calls and questions, and so I'm just going to go over some of the common questions I've been getting. One question that I get a lot is, this isn't my site because it has a different PI number than what I know my PI number is. And that it may still be your site. The way we've set it up is all sites in the site remediation program have an SRP, program interest or PI number, and then if you have RFS, you have a separate number for your RFS PI, and that number usually starts with a 5 or a 6. So if you get an invoice and the PI number that shows on the invoice starts with a 5 or a 6 and it doesn't look familiar to you, it's not because you're used to your SRP PI number. That's why. It's because that number that starts with 5 or 6 and the 6 digits is your RFS PI number. The other question I've been getting is you've overbilled me or you've tripled billed me. What you've billed me for what this bill represents, it shows an amount that's 3 times of what I should be paying. What has happened is maybe you haven't paid in 3 years. We couldn't configure the bills to show that this amount is for 2011. I just spit, so sorry. This amount is for 2012, and this amount is for 2013. It just has to show one lump sum payment. So if it looks like it's a bigger chunk of money than you think you owe, because 1% of what you have posted of your surcharge, let's say, is $100, and your bill is for $300, that's because you didn't pay. That's catching you up for the past 3 years. Make sure that you're in good shape to get your extension. Alrighty, next slide, please. So we talked about people who are required by the Brownfield Act to post RFS. Well, if you're not in compliance, if you never post it, or if you let your RFS instrument lapse, then you have to post RFS. It has to be for the entire cost of completing the remediation, not just the cost to complete the remedial investigation. Did I say that right? I'm going to say it again. Okay, I said it right. And you have to pay your surcharge, and you have to pay back surcharges from when either you triggered ISRA or you were ordered to establish your RFS. For those out there that don't want the extension but are hiding in the weeds because they haven't posted yet or they didn't maintain it, we're going to find you because we have recently this was the other thing that's going to make my head explode, been improving and making our RFS database more efficient. And so we are going to know who was required to post and who didn't post. And then you will be subject to penalties as well. So just know that, you know, I'm not going to ask who didn't do it yet, but if you were supposed to and haven't done it, now's your opportunity to come in, get it done, and just move on. Is that my next slide? Yes. All right. Now, there are cases that never had a post RFS, were not required by the Brownfields Act. They didn't trigger issue. They didn't get a consent order. They didn't get a directive. Now, if you want that extension, you do have to post RFS. Let's say you didn't have to post yet because you're an ISRA site and your trigger is cessation of operations. So the cessation of operations trigger in the ISRA statute says that you don't have to post RFS until you get to the raw phase. So you haven't posted it yet, but you're not in violation. You weren't required to post it yet. But you want that 2-year extension. Hold on. No. No, sure again. So you have to post. But what we're saying is you can post any kind of RFS instrument. You are not limited to a trust fund in this situation. You only have to post it by March 7th for the cost of completing the remedial investigation, not for the complete remediation, and you don't have to pay the surcharge. And that's now. Okay, that's so that you can qualify and get your extension. However, when you do get to the raw phase, you're going to have to resubmit the remediation cost review form and show that you're adjusting. In most cases, I think it's going to be an increase. You're adjusting your RFS, the amount of your RFS, to cover the cost to complete the remediation, not just complete the RI. And you will have to start paying surcharge from that moment on, from the date you submit your LSRP certified raw on. You won't have to pay back surcharge. You didn't have to pay surcharge to get this extension if you aren't up to the raw phase. But once you're at the raw phase, then the regular requirements for ISRA sites that cease apply. Don't click yet, because let me just make sure I said everything that is crucial. Yes, I'm a genius. Next slide. All right. The last category are people who were never required to post RFS pursuant to the Brownfields Act, and either because, well, nope, let me back up. The last category are people who never have been or will be required to post RFS under the Brownfields Act. Again, if you're not an ISRA site, no consent order, no directive, you didn't have to post. But if you want the extension, you do have to post RFS, and in that case, the only form of RFS that you can use is a remediation trust fund. The amount of the trust fund has to be the amount to complete the RI, and there's no surcharge payment at all for the trust fund. Okay, next slide. All right. Elaine, hey, you moved. There are more forms. There are forms that you have to submit. So you have to submit, of course, your extension form. And then if you hadn't established an RFS, you're just doing it now, you have to submit the cost review form. You have to submit a couple of things, actually. You have to submit the cost review form, and that's the form that tells who you are, what you're establishing, and how much you're putting in there. And the LSRP is saying this is how much it is to complete the RI, so this is how much that's in the trust, or the RFS, whatever's applicable to you. And you also have to submit with that form, if you are or were required to pay the surcharge, you have to submit a check. So if you were one of those bad guys who didn't submit, then there has to be a check included that shows that you're paid up. If you hadn't yet paid, you got the invoice and you hadn't paid it, there better be a check that shows that your surcharge is all paid up. And wow, thank you. Tessie has been to some of my other presentations and knows, look how calm I am, because I do have a pet peeve that, every presentation I go through this, and that is every freaking piece of paper that you submit to the department, whether it's a form, whether it's a check, whether it's a cover letter, whether it's just have a nice day, Karen, has to have a DEP identifier on it. And that identifier, including the checks, has to be some PI number. I don't care whether it's your RFS PI number or whether it's your SRP PI number. Put a PI number on there. Or you can even use your ISR case number that starts with E. So, because what I always tell people is, I still can't believe, because I still get these checks. I get checks for hundreds of thousands of dollars made out to the Treasurer of New Jersey, not a case name on it. It's like maybe from an attorney or from a bank, not a case name on it, not a PI number, not an issue. What am I supposed to do with that check? I'm going to go get myself a driver's license that says Treasurer, State of New Jersey, and I'm going to go to those check cashing places, and I am going to cash that check. But maybe I shouldn't do that. All right, it's been a long day. I'm stressed. I'm not going to do that. Please put identifiers on every piece of paper that you submit. Moving on, let's see. What else about the forms? All right, oh, yes, and so you have to submit the cost review form, you have to submit the check, and you have to submit the original RFS instrument. If it's a trust fund agreement, if it's a letter of credit, whatever it is, that has to be included. We have to keep that. We have to have that. The certification language that's at the end of the letters of credit, there are model documents up on the web. Model documents for the letter of credit, for the line of credit, from the Remediation Trust Fund. When you submit those, when you go to your bank or your attorney to get one of those instruments for yourself, for your client, you have to have the language of that agreement has to be word for word the same as our model document that's on the web. And in fact, we've changed the certification that's at the end of all these documents to say, it used to say, yep, I get it, I'm setting aside this money, I can't touch this money. And now it also says, and I swear that we haven't messed with the language in the model document. And that is because this is, when you submit this stuff, you're approved. And we don't have time to review everything. You know, my bank doesn't want to use a comma, they want to use a semicolon. Not happening. It has to be word for word, punctuation by punctuation, the same as what's in our model, and the certification says that. And also, just make sure, because the forms and the models have been changing or have changed recently based on this exemption debacle. Now that looks like Mark left. And so make sure you're on the website and you're getting the latest version that's on there. When they are posted, then you must go on the website and get them. And they will be posted shortly, hopefully tomorrow. All right. Coming to the end. Next slide. All right, for you, those people who deal with majors, because that's mostly who this applies to. If you are one entity, but you are responsible for remediating many sites in New Jersey, so it's mostly the big oil companies that have lots of gas stations in New Jersey, and they normally would not be required to be posting RFS, but they want the extension. They have to post a trust fund. They don't have to post a trust fund per site or per gas station. They can, we're calling it bundle. I like that. They can bundle all their sites into one remediation trust fund. Okay, so in order to do that, you have to submit forms. And we have new forms for that. And this is what we want to know day to day is, do you have enough money in that trust fund to cover the to cover the completion of the RI for all the sites you're responsible for remediating? And that is covered by this form. It has a longer title than that. You would not believe how long the title is, so I'm just calling it the bundling the cases under one remediation trust fund form. It goes on because it also talks about the extension. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Once you see that form, that is the form where you're going to report the big picture. How much is posted, how much has been dispersed, increased or decreased during the quarter. That form has to be submitted with the initial bundling request, and it has to be submitted quarterly. And you have to report quarterly on what you did the last quarter. Also, there is a RFS site name and location table that goes with that bundling form. And that talks about the details of each site. So let's say you are ABC Oil Corporation and you have 10 gas stations in New Jersey that you're responsible for remediating. You want the extension for all 10 of them. You are going to have to post a remediation trust fund. You can post one trust fund, let's say to clean up or to complete the RI at these 10 total, these 10 sites is $100,000. Tee hee. Then your trust fund has to be for $100,000, and that's going to be on the bundling cases under one RTF form. Attached to that form is going to be this table that shows, and here's the specific sites that this deals with. So it's Karen gas station, it's Tessie gas station, etc. Okay. Then you also have to submit a spreadsheet. Now the spreadsheet is how we're going to track the day-to-day or the minutia, the details of each site, what was spent, what was increased, what was decreased. That we're not going to look at in detail unless something bad happens and the person who's responsible for cleaning up the sites walks away from cleaning up the sites. Then we're going to have to know, Karen's gas station, that one alone cost $40,000. So we need to take that trust fund, take $40,000 and use it to clean up or to complete the RI at Karen's gas station. So that is that. Again, it's big picture, the bundling form, the table that shows the sites, and then the spreadsheet that has the details. Next slide. That is it.
All right.
Okay.
Didn't she do a great job? Come on, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
But she was only kidding about the embezzlement of their funds. As a joke, you need to tell everyone about this.
All right, so you just got a whole lot of information, and Barry is here, and Elaine is here, and Karen is here. So we'll take question number 1. And you're going to talk loud so everybody can hear you.
I will speak loudly. 2 questions, one for Barry, the easy one, and the second one for Elaine. I notice that on the extension request form, it appears as there's no place for the RP to sign. We'll be signing and certifying as the LSRP. Will they be signing on that as well?
Actually, it's a question
That's
for
a
me.
question for you? Perfect. And you can
Yes.
answer both of them.
The authorization form is actually signed by the RP, and it says, I'm authorizing this LSRP to file on my behalf.
But it's not necessarily saying the information being submitted is accurate. That's back on the LSRP. Is that correct?
No. It-
No?
Yes. It's
Okay, 'cause you didn't really
this
make that clear.
particular, the statute and this whole service is going back to the RP.
Okay.
You're not looking at, going after LSRP. We're looking at the RP.
Okay. That's fine. It was just not clear. That's why I asked that. Second question for you was, now you alluded to some potential submissions that had to be in prior to the March 7th deadline. Maybe
Prior
one of
to
them might have been
filing
Yeah.
your
extension
form
request.
that says, hey, I qualify for an extension.
Right. And that was like HDSRF, that type of thing. Is that what you were looking at?
Right. If you are filing because you're saying, I qualify for the extension because I have a HDSRF application that's in process, you have to have the HDSRF application with us before we can certify that we have it. I'm pretty sure we have some FAQs, et cetera, and the form itself, it says that you have done these already. So that means if you don't have an initial receptor evaluation for this site, get that in and get that filed prior to doing your DEP online filing of the extension. So anything that you're checking off that says, I've done, has to be in with us beforehand.
So it would have been those other documents we would have had to have submitted to meet those requirements. There was nothing additional based. That was my
Correct.
Okay, great, thanks.
All right. Dan?
Hold on. You should know better, Dan.
You just said that the RE needs to be submitted before you ask for the extension, but the RE was due a long time ago for sites that were pre-99. So they're in violation of mandatory time frame, so they wouldn't qualify, right?
Well, actually, the way the statute was written, I don't know, Barry, maybe, I'm going to put this one over to you because this is all more your stuff.
Yeah, the way the statute's written, even though that initial receptor evaluation may have been due a year and a half ago, as long as you get it in by May 7th, you meet, March 7th, you meet the qualifications.
It doesn't, and that wouldn't mean that they haven't missed a mandatory time frame. It just will allow them to qualify for the exemption.
Correct.
Did that make sense? Do we need to say it again? Say it again.
In order to get the extension, everything has to be up to date by the time you make that submittal, even though you may have theoretically missed a time frame. And there may be other consequences relative to that, irrespective of this extension. But for this purpose, to get the extension, as long as everything has been submitted, even if you had, say, a delinquent PA report or a delinquent SI report, as long as it is submitted by the time you submit the application, you're okay, relative to this issue. Again, there still may be consequences for missing the deadline, irrespective of that. Yes, sir.
May I add to this, Barry?
Yes, you may.
My name is Ronald T. Corkery. No, Mark Peterson. I think one of the things that gets to, again, you need to read the statute, because the statute didn't say that you're in compliance with mandatory timeframes. It says that you're in compliance with mandatory timeframes at the time of filing. There was recognition even by the department that we've done a lot of compliance assistance to bring parties into compliance who have demonstrated a willingness to go ahead with the remediation. We did not want to exclude those individuals from getting the RI extension. So the answer to Dan's comment is they may have violated the mandatory time frame in the past, but have come into compliance, and they can get the extension as of the date. And as Barry says, that doesn't mean that there isn't an outstanding violation. It's not tied directly together. Sorry, I just can't try that.
Thank you, Ron.
So if a mandatory time frame due date is after March 7th, you're still in compliance. This is for an LNAPL IRM report.
Correct. Right. You may have a situation where a relatively new IEC or a new discovery of an LNAPL. Right. If that time frame is post March, then that would be your time frame. Yeah.
Hi, I had a question. You mentioned, Barry, that if or maybe it was Mr. Ron, that if you go to sign up on the extension and your case is not on the DP's list of cases that have the extension requirement or have that deadline, you'll get kicked back saying you don't have it. What if you have a case that never was picked up by DEP's evaluation of what cases are subject, and you want to bring them in compliance even though they never got caught up in the were caught by DP, say, on the list?
If you have that situation and you know about it now, please alert us. We've done quite a bit of data crunching, but we are talking about our old legacy cases, and some of them haven't been touched since we migrated into our new system. So there may still be ones out there. The way the electronic submittal will work is we will collect all the information and change the RI to be completed date. And for some of these cases, there will be nothing to update. So that's why we have an email that goes out to alert us that there may be a data issue there. But if you know about it up front, it's a lot cleaner for us to get that information in the system so when you do file, it does get extended appropriately.
Then also, if my client has to submit a fee that they owe, they submit it today, say, and I know it usually takes quite a few weeks for it to show up in the system. when I do the form, is your form checking that, or I'm just certifying that it was submitted?
You're just certifying that it's submitted. We have modified our financial obligations report to reflect the fact that it does take 2 or 3 weeks sometimes for the check to process through Treasury and for our DEP database to get updated. So we recognize that. This is not a sophisticated service where you get like a red light saying, oh, nope, nope, nope. You know, you have outstanding fees, you can't go further. So we're looking for honesty here. And if we do come across a situation where fees are not paid and an extension has been granted, we can revoke it because basically you have fallen out of compliance. So,
And Karen, three structure out, right? On RFS, can you reduce the RFS as you go along under RI?
Yes.
We have somebody over here that's been wanting to ask a question.
Barry, based on what you sort of think I heard you say, these are very old cases. If completing our RI, we find other conditions, wouldn't we call in a new case number for those conditions, and that would not apply to what needs to be completed for this time frame?
Yes, thank you, thank you. It's not an easy answer in the sense that it's a question of should you have known that based on an initial preliminary assessment. So you got that issue. But if it's truly something that, you know, you're doing your delineation work and you find a tank that no one knew about, or you found, you know, some sort of underground line that no one knew about, then that could be treated as a separate discharge outside the constraints of the May 2014.
One question over here.
wait, can I just add to that?
Oh, hold on.
For those that will be considered a separate case if you don't want to deal with the RI. So there will be 2 cases, one subject to the RI timeframe and then a new one. So just realize that with that, you have another receptor evaluation and all the other compliance components and 2 fees.
This is actually a 2-part question, one for Barry and one for Karen. But the first part is, if the property has just, I guess, still in limbo at the SI phase, the LSRP can't confirm or deny the presence of an IEC or, you know, natural contaminant. We don't know because we haven't been authorized access on the site, or, you know, they haven't paid their bill, or any of those excuses that the RPs want to come up with. What is the holdup on that? If you're just, say, starting the process now after, you know, so many 15 years of them sitting on their behind, what is the department's position on that matter? If they got, you know, they did work, say, in 1997, there's some possible VOA contamination from unregulated tanks. They haven't done anything in 15 years. How could the LSRP be able to answer those 3 questions if, I mean, they haven't been compliant? They're nervous now because obviously they're up against the wall.
Okay, this is the way I understand this is you've recently been retained as an LSRP, and the site really hasn't progressed beyond the SI stage.
Correct.
In that instance, since you don't know that there's an IEC condition, you can't be held accountable for it. But as you progress relative to doing your delineation and you come across an IEC trigger, then you're going to have to deal with it under the constraints of the existing rules, and you would have to be in compliance with meeting all of those regulatory and mandatory deadlines relative to the IEC. Same thing if you were doing your delineation and you find an LNAPL situation, it would be the same thing.
Okay, and part 2 would have to do, the only thing that the department is accepting is a remedial trust fund for the cost of the remedial investigation. And that's going to be third-party validated, I'm assuming?
Well, let me just clarify. As I went over, there's a limited circumstance where people only can use a trust fund, and that would be if they never had to
Right.
and don't have to in the future.
Right,
So-
I mean, they just,
So when you say third-party validated, I'm not sure I understand
well,
what you mean.
in that, one of those boxes, it says, there's a default level, which obviously isn't applicable in here, but you have to decide on how you came up with this number.
Right.
And in one of those things is a third party, like another LSRP validates one LSRP, a bank, and there's a accountant that says that number makes sense based on standard industrial practices. That's a fair number.
I got to say, I don't know. I'm not from. Is that on one of our forms?
Yeah, I believe it's on the funding source form. It says how did it.
Yeah, the cost review form does say how did you arrive at that, and you used RACER or you used
Right, yes.
one of those things, right? And then it says or other.
Right.
And you can put something else in there, but the bank or the lawyer who's going to be your trustee is going to accept what you as the LSRP says is the amount. And the reason we want to know how you did it is just for internal DEP use. So it's, you don't have to get an accountant to validate it or verify it. It's basically on the LSRP.
Right, I'm
to
saying
say,
that it's going to cost,
this is how much I think it's going to cost to complete the
$150,000 or whatever. Right. Okay.
So bank or a lawyer, put that much money in my trust. I'm putting that much money in my trust fund.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Was there a question back here? Nope. We're going to take a couple from the website first, and then we will see. Let's see. Are we required to submit the remediation cost review and copy the trust fund to DEP prior to or with our online RI extension submission, that blue one? So,
Yes. If you need to establish RFS by March 7th, then you have to submit all the documents that you would have to establish your RFS. So you have to submit on top of submitting just the form that says I want the extension, you're going to have to submit the cost review form, and like I said, you're going to have to submit the original RFS instrument, whether it's a trust fund or whether it's a letter of credit. Why do you have to stand so? Back off, bitch. See, now you have derailed my train of thought, and I'm going to start all over again. So, I was born a poor. All right. Yes, you have to submit your extension form. You have to submit your cost review form. You have to submit your original instrument, whatever is required. If you have to submit a surcharge payment, then you have to submit your surcharge payment. All of that, you submit what you can submit through the portal, and then prior to March 7th.
I want to answer this, Karen. Your RFS has to be filed prior to filing anything online. So anything that you're certifying to on that RI extension, have it into us first. If you don't, we potentially could look at it and say, hey, you don't qualify. So RFS, RTF, establish prior to certification.
There you go.
all right, the next question. I understand that remediation compliance is the responsibility of the RP. From a practical standpoint, the majority of people facing the RI deadline had no idea that they had had an issue until receiving the notification by DEP. That's a little scoffing over here. That they had to hire an LSRP as late as 2012. Further, many sites never received any notification whatsoever, including sites that I have worked on or reviewed in Data Miner. Most of these sites missed mandatory timeframes for receptor evaluation and or SI before they were even aware that their cases were still active. These are missed deadlines, disqualifying them from getting the extension. I think we answered that. We said it doesn't disqualify you as long as they get something gets submitted prior to that March 7th deadline.
Also, as a person who did numerous mass mailings. I felt like I was the free coupon person. We sent out compliance alerts. We sent out May 2012 letters twice. And the last item was that you're subject to the RI timeframe. So we tried to spread the word. We have had information on Data Miner for the longest time where you can look up a site and see if it's still active or closed. So we did our best to alert people long before the May 2014 date came around.
And that's also the LSRPs have a responsibility, if they get hired by somebody to help inform them of what their responsibilities are. If they haven't paid their bills, then we're all in a bad place, right? What is the planned course of action for municipalities who do not have an SI complete? Any? And we have an enforcement program that will, if they're out of compliance, get into compliance. LSRP should help them do that. All right. How about in the room? Oh. You? Go ahead on that side.
The regulations state that the time frame for the remedial action starts with the earliest applicable regulatory time frame for the RI. So if you apply for an extension, does the clock start in 2014 or 2016?
It was